officially day 2 of 31 Days of Horror-Ween 2017. Today we have not only one of the best, I guess the term for it would be pre-horror if we want to be accurate, silent films of all time, but for my money, one of the best silent films ever of any genre. From 1919, it is J'accuse by Abel Gance. And this is a really, really great movie that shows kind of the early seeds of what the horror genre would become. You know, like I said with day 1, it really took a while before the horror film became explicitly a type of media where the object or the intent was to arouse a certain emotion out of the audience, that being to terrify them. So remember, 1919, the idea of movie genre is still kind of a fledgling concept. So most of the stuff you see here, especially from this era, you know, it kind of falls into either the old tragio-comedy or just plain comedic stylings, right? You know, the silent stuff, the Charlie Chaplin stuff, all that falls into the traditional vaudevillian comedy. And then the other stuff follows more along the lines of the old Shakespearean plays, right? Your basic stage play with tragedy and some elements of humor. But mostly it just comes off as a play. And with J'accuse, what's different is it doesn't come off as a play. You don't see it as being a film where it's kind of isolated to one location or one character. I mean, the stuff they do in this movie is really impressive. I mean, we're having like these huge, like massive, gargantuan, you know, scenes outdoors, filming battlefields. And here's the crazy thing about this movie: it was filmed during 1918. So when they're out there filming, you know, these shots on battlefields, they're real battlefields. Like they were actually used at the time during World War I. So it gives it a very, very eerie sort of otherworldly quality to it that, you know, you really can't put your finger on what it is, but as soon as you see the cinematography in this movie, you're like, oh wow, that is really just something else. Alright, so J'accuse, the movie is, like I said, not really a straight horror film, but it does incorporate a supernatural hook at the very end. And much like The Avenging Conscience and Student of Prague, it also comes off as a morality play, where that's kind of the whole point, where if you're a person you do really sort of mischievous and nefarious things, you know, eventually someone's going to come along and give you your comeuppance. So it's very similar in nature to the old EC comics, you know, the Tales from the Crypt stuff, where people who are very, very bad do bad things, and eventually, you know, they sow what they reap. So this is a movie where it starts off, it's about World War I. It starts off in Germany, and it's 1914, and you have these two guys who are about to enlist, and you got one, a guy named Francois, and he's just a jerk. Just a complete jerk who thinks his wife is cheating on him. But the thing is, she actually is cheating on him, so he has a reason to be upset. And she's cheating on him with the local poet, and he's this guy who's like completely hippy-dippy and anti-war and all that other stuff. So anyway, the Francois guy, the guy who's married to the woman who's having an affair with the poet, he goes off to war, and the poet doesn't want his lover to stay in town because, hey, you got a war going on, you want bad things to happen, so get out of here. So he tells her to vamoose and gives her like a train ticket to go be with her parents during the war. But ironically enough, he sends her off to her fate because when he does that, she's apprehended by some German soldiers who rape her. Now, of course, they don't show it, but it's heavily implied, and it's amazing to me, like, just how much stuff you could see, like, just how more graphic and explicit and sort of controversial that a lot of the silent films were, like, compared to like movies that came out in the 1940s and 1950s. I mean, you go back and you watch the D.W. Griffith stuff, I mean, that stuff's way more violent and sexually charged and stuff we saw even like the 1940s and 1950s. So that's one of those things that's really sort of noteworthy if you're going to be not just a horror film analyst, but a true student of cinema and all its formations. So what ends up happening is the poet and Francois end up both getting drafted, and they end up on the same battalion. And, you know, they keep going back and forth. And they're kind of arguing over who loves the woman more. And they don't really know about her being raped yet, so there's that. So, you know, they basically just go back and forth, you know, talking about, you know, their philosophies on life and where they come from. And eventually the poet, he gets released from the military, and he finds the woman he's having an affair with, and there's a little bit of conflict going on there, and basically they have an illegitimate child, and of course this is like 1914, back when people actually cared about stuff like that, so clearly that's the kind of stuff you don't want revealed. And eventually Francois, the husband, comes back from war, and he finds the poet, and they find out, okay, well, they finally come to terms about the affair, and they find out that the poet sired the illegitimate child, so of course the only thing they can do is they got to duel. They got to fight. So what they do is they have an actual brawl, like an actual fight. And then, for whatever reason, they just get really irked at one another and decide to go back to war because they're just so pissed off at this whole scenario. The only thing they can do is go back to the battlefield and just get their jollies out there. And this is the part where it gets really awesome, and we see that supernatural sort of twist to it. So they go back to the forces, and when they get there, there's this nightmarish vision that one of the characters dies. I'm not going to say who it is. Actually, not going to say anything more because both of them die. Sorry, spoiler. But one of them has like a nightmare of like all of the dead World War I soldiers coming back to life. Actually, no, it's not the World War I soldiers. It's the, where is it? Yeah, it's the World War I soldiers. I think it might be something from the French Revolution too, but that's neither here nor there. And the Napoleonic Wars, but we don't have to get into that. But anyway, he's dying, and he has like this nightmare of like all the World War I troops coming back from the dead as like ghosts and taking over the battlefield, and it's a really terrifying scene. I mean, it's legitimately creepy because one of the things you figured out about this movie is they actually use real soldiers for these scenes, and a lot of these guys, after they filmed that scene, they went out and got killed for real in an actual war. So there's definitely like a super like eerie, surreal quality to it. So anyway, one of the characters, I'm not going to say which one, he survives the war, and he goes back to his little village, and he's having to, deal with everything he's been through, like all the mayhem he's wrought, all the lives he's ruined, and, well, he dies. I'm not going to say how he dies, because it's kind of hard to explain. I don't want to give it away. But it's one of those movies where, once again, it's a morality play. You have all these people doing really horrible things and just being dickish to one another, and eventually they reap the consequences. So it's a film that, much like Student of Prague, definitely falls in the line of being a morality play, of being a melodrama which uses a supernatural hook to work as a plot device. And we'll be seeing this a whole lot more. But like I said, it's not really a straight-up horror film, but it's certainly a film that kind of paved the way for it. Because this is one of the movies where the ending is definitely meant to just scare the living crap out of you, and it succeeds. So it's definitely a pivotal film there, and I think a lot of the technique that was used in that movie to show ghosts, where you have like just that sort of like half projection on screen, is something that was like industry standard for half a century before we got better special effects. So it's noteworthy for that on a technical level as well. So yeah, it's a great movie, and interestingly enough, the director Abel Gance actually remade this movie a couple of years later, right when World War II was about to start. And that was more explicitly about preventing another great war from breaking out. And it had a slightly different plot. Personally, I think that movie's better than this one, but just considering the time frame and the technological constraints, this is a impressive as hell movie. So if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. It's a great, great, great movie. Not just one of the best proto-horror films ever made, but really one of the best movies ever made about World War I. Definitely top 10 from my perspective. So yeah, I have no problem at all giving this one a full 4 tofu dogs out of 4. That's our rating system this year. I know we were going to do candy, but we had to change it at the last minute because I didn't have pictures of candy anywhere on my hard drive. But I had hot dogs, so we go with hot dogs. So I'm giving my highest possible rating. You need to see this one, not just if you're a horror fan, but if you are a horror fan, you definitely need to see it just to see where a lot of the pacing and element and structural things that were later implemented in more genre films actually came from. So, without question, you need to see this one at some point in your life. If not this Halloween, somewhere down the road. Alright, well, we'll be back with day 3. And from there, we're finally getting into the 1920s, where the horror genre became a little bit more explicit, a little bit more refined, and we'll be starting off with one of the most influential European films of the 1920s. I'm not going to give it away, but let's just say I'm pretty sure Ingmar Bergman saw this one like a bajillion times.